Nicole and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to be repotting these Phalaenopsis orchids. So I've got two here that I've recently received from Hauserman Orchids, and they are in these tight little plug containers in Sphagnum Moss, and it's very tight in there. So I'm going to clean them up and put them into some fresh new medium. So we'll get started. So this one is the Phalaenopsis LD's Bear King RH3. This is a fragrant orchid, and it's got a flower spike on it. So you can see it right there. So I'm going to be really careful with this. I'm actually going to cut it down with a pair of scissors. And let's see what we're working with. So a lot of times with these orchids, they come here and they're packed so tightly in moss that it really suffocates and damages a lot of the root system. And you know, a lot of times I know it's because it's going through transport and these orchids don't get a lot of time to get watered, but this is very tight. So we're gonna clear this up. I'm gonna pot it into moss as well, but we'll get rid of this pot, give the roots a little air, and let's see what we're working with here. So far the roots outside look really nice. They're green, they're not smushy, they're not rotten. I put on gloves this time because last time I was dealing with a mold issue, so I'm hoping that there are no pests in here. Let's see. Yeah, so this orchid, as you can see, is quite tightly packed. This is pretty tight, and tight Sphagnum Moss or within Phalaenopsis, that's a big killer of orchids. You water them too much and they will not do so well for you. So we're gonna put this, I'm gonna keep it in Sphagnum Moss. This is a primary hybrid, I believe, and it likes a little bit more moisture, so I'm not gonna put it in bark. I'm gonna keep it in Sphagnum Moss after we get rid of this, all of this. And I did soak it for a little while, so it's pretty drenched at this point, and I shouldn't have any issues getting rid of this moss on the inside. That's very tight in the middle. I'm surprised that not more roots are dead with how tight this was packed. Look at this clump over here. Very, very dense. So this one is an orange orchid. It's fragrant. This is my first fragrant Phalaenopsis. So this one should be really nice. Before this order that I got from Hauserman's, I only have two other grocery store Phalaenopsis. And those are not fragrant, but they're beautiful. They're reliable bloomers. They're really easy to take care of, and they come back every single year without fail. But this one is my first fragrant orchid, first fragrant Phalaenopsis orchid. And it takes the same level of care as the other orchids. So should be really rewarding when I see that spike open up, which is right over here. We're going to be really careful with that. So you know, first impression on this orchid is that all of the roots look really good. I don't see anything rotten. So despite it being in all of this moss over here, all of that was in that little pot, and it's still really packed down. Like, this is pretty nuts in my opinion. Anyhow, this tells me that this orchid does like a lot of moisture, so I am going to keep it in Sphagnum Moss. I'm going to give this a quick rinse, and then I will come back to repot it. All right, we are back, and I rinsed everything off and I sprayed it down with a little hydrogen peroxide in case there were any pests in there, and I removed as much medium as possible. There were no dead roots, which is phenomenal. These look really good, very healthy. So I am going to use a self-watering pot. And the reason for this is that because when I go to work, sometimes I'm away for a long time and I want to make sure I can basically future-proof my orchid collection. So if I need to, I could have some water in the reservoir and not have to worry about the orchid. And I'm going to use some sphagnum moss. And I'm going to keep it very airy. I don't want it to suffocate the roots whatsoever. So when potting with sphagnum moss, you just have to be very mindful of that. That the orchid roots, they like moisture, but they like air. So I'm not going to pack it the way that it was where it was originally. And that's pretty much it. I'm just going to keep it very airy, very fluffy. And this pot should work for quite a long time. So we've added some sphagnum moss at the bottom. I'm actually going to remove the main pot. I have my wick in there as well. You guys have seen me use these self-watering containers before. And we're just going to slowly add some sphagnum moss. We're not going to pack it tightly. We're just going to secure it around the root system. And this will give lots of moisture but not suffocate the roots. Some folks are afraid of sphagnum moss. Sphagnum moss is easy to use. You just have to be so mindful of how tightly you pack it down. And once you keep it like fluffy and like stringy like this, it'll be just fine. It's a great medium. I oftentimes mix it with bark, but in this case, I know this is a moisture-loving phal, and it was in a tight plug and none of the roots died off. So I'll keep the consistency with the sphagnum moss for this one, and we'll see how it does. And now, typically, I wouldn't go up so much in pot size, but I don't have that many pots. So I'm putting it in a 5-inch pot. So I won't water it too often. The larger the pot, the less you need to water because it holds more water. So I'll always keep that in mind as I'm doing my weekly feeding and watering for this orchid. And I'm going to speed up and just accommodate this orchid and come back with a top layer of bark. So we are done. I filled it in with sphagnum moss, and as you can see, it's very fluffy in here. So lots of air for the roots, yet lots of moisture. The wick I didn't put too high because in this case, sphagnum moss is extremely wicking, more so than leca. And we don't need it to be very high up in the pot. But it is a little bit wobbly, which is normal because this orchid is not tightly bound in here. But as it establishes and grows new roots, this wobble will be gone. So I'll just be very careful in the beginning and everything will be okay. So this is my Phalaenopsis LD Bear King, and it is good to go. So now we'll move on to the Phalaenopsis hieroglyphica. Okay, so let's see what we're working with this Phalaenopsis hieroglyphica. It looks tight. I'm going to cut it with a pair of scissors. Let's see. Looks like it's similar situation as the other orchid, where it was very tightly packed. This one I believe has 2 spikes from what I saw. So we'll see what we're dealing with. Hopefully the root system is the same. So we'll see. All right. Yeah, it looks like similar situation here. The sphagnum moss is pretty tight. Hopefully the roots are healthy, just like the other orchid, but we shall see. So far it looks okay. I just hate when these roots are so tightly packed because the last orchid was just fine, but a lot of Phalaenopsis orchids, they can't take this level of packing in the sphagnum moss too long. And it suffocates the roots. So what I'll do is I'll fast forward to getting all of this medium off, and we'll come back to look at the roots. So I've got the majority of the medium off the roots. There are a few dead roots, like this one over here doesn't look so great. So we'll clean this up and cut them, but I noticed that there is a possible flower spike down here. Let me take you closer. I have a feeling this is a flower spike, just because it looks like a mitt. Can you see the top right there? Might be a little bit difficult to see, but let me focus. Looks like a mitt. So I think that's a flower spike. It's growing down below. There is another flower spike right over here. Let me focus and zoom in. See that growth right there? And then there's another one back here. So it looks like we're dealing with 3 flower spikes, which is great. So let me rinse this off and we'll come back to cut the dead roots and pot this up. All right, we are back. So I've cleared everything out. I've sprayed it down with a little bit of hydrogen peroxide and we're ready to start removing the dead roots. So the way that you could tell a root is dead is if it's very papery feeling and it doesn't feel like it has substance. So this one seems dead to me. It's very, very mushy. And you could sort of, it looks like it's ripped there too. So I am going to cut it off just before I see it starting to rot. So I'm going to try to not introduce a new wound. So this, yeah, this is definitely dead. So let's see if we have any others. This one looks a little dead, but I don't want to introduce another wound. We'll just do the very tip. Yeah, we're not introducing a new wound with that. This isn't bad. I was surprised that these roots right here, they were in a very, very tight pack of sphagnum moss and it didn't die. Just this one root over here. I'll just rip off with my hands. This is also in pretty good shape and I think it does like a lot of moisture. So we're going to keep it in sphagnum moss. And honestly, I didn't have to cut very much. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to move this from my workspace and we will we'll work with sphagnum moss. So I am going to, I'm using the same system. I have a little wick here just to bring up some moisture in case I need extra water during the summer or if I'm on vacation or whatnot. But we're going to do the same exact thing. We're going to do a very, very fluffy mix of sphagnum moss. And we will accommodate our orchid in here. The key with sphagnum moss, and this is really important, I'll keep reiterating this, is that it has to remain very, very flaky. So not flaky, it has to be very, very fluffy. You can't pack it down the way that it came. So this is the proper way of working with all sphagnum moss. If you pack it down too much, it will rot your roots over the long run. So you don't want that. So let me cover the wick a little. And there we go. We're about halfway up with this sphagnum moss. So I will put my Phalaenopsis in here. And we will have the roots go around the pot. And keep the crown above the top of the water. So we're going to keep it very, very, very flaky. Rather, I keep saying flaky. We're going to keep it very, very airy, very fluffy. And I will finish up with this and then come back to not bore you. I'm very slow with this whole process. I just want to make sure that this orchid is getting the adequate moisture levels but does not get suffocated, because when you're repotting with sphagnum moss, it can be very tricky. And the tricky part is just making sure that there's plenty of air, plenty of circulation that is very, very fluffy. So anytime I'm messing with the media, as you can see, I'm just like fluffing it up, just like a fluffy pillow. You don't want big, tight pockets going in. You don't want to push it down too much. I'll finish this up and I'll come back. Okay, we are all set. And as you can see, this is a very, very, very fluffy mix. So although it's going to give constant moisture to this orchid, it won't suffocate the roots. And same thing with the other orchid, it'll take a while to establish, so it'll be a little tiny bit wobbly, so I just have to be careful when I'm watering them. Otherwise, we're all set. So this is the Phalaenopsis hieroglyphica, and I'm gonna top these off with a little bit of bark on top, and the bark is to prevent algae at the very top. Then we'll be all done. So my Phalaenopsis orchids are all set and good to go. I've topped them off with a little bark. As you can see right over here, I've got a little flower spike coming in for this orchid. It's gonna be fragrant and I'm really excited about it. So I'll keep you posted on the growth and the progress of these in their new Sphagnum Moss setup. But I am all set. Thank you guys for watching. Talk soon. Bye.